authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us, from personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation.
For the charge of transportation to engage in prostitution, there is no mandatory minimum sentence. So, in summary, while a maximum of 20 years is possible, it is likely that the actual sentence for a first-time offender with no criminal record will be significantly less, potentially measured in months rather than years for the diddler. What say the sippers? Do y'all think Diddy will receive up to 10 years? Maybe serving 5 in each count? Or do you think he'll get like 2 in each count, maybe serving or getting 4, maybe serving 2, being that Diddy's already served almost 1 year, doing only 1 year in federal prison? That's what I say. I believe that's what my tea is. Y'all drop it down in the chat. We are everything Diddy. Verdict came in, sippers. Get y'all's ass in here and get y'all's teacups filled up with the diddler. 2 accounts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Everything else dropped out on his goddamn ass. Okay.
I think it's an argument that can be made. Obviously, the prosecution is going to argue against it vociferously. I'd be surprised if the judge went along with it. But candidly, I think we've all been a little surprised by what's happened in the past few hours. But again, I don't anticipate the judge will allow it.
Mark Agnifilo continuing on here saying his family is here and could sign a bond. He should be released today to go back and live at 2-Star Island, which is in Miami. Judge says, this is just coming up right now. I will hear from the government in a moment. Are you proposing he just walk outside now? And the defense says yes. Candace, there's going to be a lot of conversation about Sean Combs and his legacy. You can't unsee the 2016 video from the Intercontinental Hotel, that is for sure. But how does this verdict impact how people may view Sean Combs going forward?
You know, some people are going to view him as a hero. Some people are going to view him as a victim. They really will. Some people are going to say, what in the world? We were in there for 7 weeks and we heard all of this debauchery and all of these things that when we look at the cumulative effect of the evidence, I think he was guilty. So you're going to have people on both sides. But I think in terms of his legacy, personally, the legacy for him is going to still be his music. That's going to survive and live. But I think there's a legacy that's going to happen in terms of this case in particular. And when RICO is used, there's going to be a lot of conversation and information exchange online and on shows like yours about when do we really need to apply RICO, because out of this, I think that's what the largest conversation has been about. Yes, there was Astroglide and yes, there was baby oil, but what is this RICO and what does it mean? And is it being unfairly used by people who are in the music industry? Is it being unfairly used by people like him who happen to be rich and seemed like someone who we could make a big headline out of if we are the prosecutors? This is what the defense was saying in their closing argument, that this is just over prosecution of someone who, let's leave his legacy alone. There's nobody here who's coming after Sean Combs but the government. Don't trust them. I think that's going to be the lasting legacy of this case in particular.
And you think of the 2016 video once again, and it's the video of Sean Combs. He's in a towel. He's chasing after Cassie Ventura, and grabs her and beats her. It was video that Sean Combs then, according to testimony from a security guard, he paid off $100,000 to get rid of what he thought was the only copy. And yet, in the end, they find not guilty of sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. William, what about her testimony just didn't get the job done? Or maybe should I say, what is it about the defense's argument that did get the job done and got a not guilty verdict?
I'm going to assume that it was the defense counsel's argument that was saying, look, this is a complicated relationship. This is a relationship that was fraught with domestic violence, but Sean Combs hasn't been charged with domestic violence. Sean Combs has been charged with this grand scheme, this RICO enterprise, if you will. And there's a big difference between being involved in the RICO scheme and being, unfortunately, a serial abuser. And if we were on trial for him being a serial abuser, there's no argument to be made. We've all watched the video. We're going to watch it 100 times during the course of this trial. But you can't make the connection between him being a serial abuser to him running this giant criminal enterprise, including the sex trafficking. Because again, there was a huge amount of digital footprints where she was involved in it and she was willing to go along with it and she was amenable to it and she indicated that she was into it and things along those lines. And those points obviously hit home with the jury.
And also not guilty on sex trafficking of the victim who went by the pseudonym Jane, who also there were text messages that the defense used to argue that these were consensual relationships. There's been a lot of talk, Candace. I want to say hello to the 55,000 people joining us right now for this coverage of the verdicts in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. There's been a lot of talk about just how good Sean Combs' defense team was, that this was the all-star dream team cast for a defense team. What did they do that is different than the typical defense attorney that you see in a courtroom?
Witnesses, it was kind of like they did, in that they were able to jab holes into the witnesses on cross-examination. So really they had witnesses speaking on their behalf. If you look on it that way, that you are my witnesses and now I'm going to show inconsistencies. Now I'm going to show bias. Now I'm going to show that you are a money grabber in this particular one. Now I'm going to show that the government is after Sean Combs. So I think that there were a lot of opportunities and they did do a very good job. On the other hand, so did the prosecution. So I think that that's really kind of the takeaway, and that is when we look at these attorneys that were great across the board. That was one of the things that was really spectacular about this. You saw fine attorneys on both sides doing very, very good work. Of course, Sean Combs is in that position to afford an attorney, and not everybody's legal journey is going to look this way. But the defense did do a very good job. During closing, Mark Agnifilo was very interactive, comedic, really kind of brought light to the fact that, you know what, maybe this is, not as big as you think. So we got Astroglide off the streets, right? That's what he said. Big deal. Oh, wow. Aren't they great? So he really kind of made light of what this really could translate as when you really break down what he said is just a modern day love story. Some people might laugh at that, but he did connect with the jury in that way. With the same token, so did the prosecution, but the jury made their choice.
Another update from court, the judge asking the defense, are you proposing $1 million bond? Mark Agnifilo says, Diddy's defense attorney, yes, and travel to Florida, New York, and Los Angeles. Then Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey says the U.S. opposes his release. A person found guilty shall be detained until the judicial officer finds he is not likely to flee or be a danger. Comey continues on saying the defendant faces a maximum sentence of 20 years. Even while faced with this case, he assaulted Jane. Here in New York, preparing to surrender, he had drugs in his hotel room, was ready to commit the same offense. The judge then continues on saying, I am not going to resolve this second. I need to review the statutes. Ms. Comey, do you have a case in which bail was denied after a conviction under the Mann Act? You may confer and come back. We plan to be here the whole day. So this, we do have more business to attend to, even though this verdict has been read. Let's go back to Sierra Gillespie outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Sierra, what more are you seeing outside the courthouse? And just as you're processing how all of this played out, as someone who covers celebrity for our Law and Crime YouTube channel Scandal, how will people, and time will tell, but how does this impact Diddy's legacy compared to if he came back as guilty for racketeering conspiracy?
Wow, Chris, there's a lot to digest. Again, I am still shocked the fact that we have a verdict after 1 hour of deliberation this morning. And like I said, we're here live on our live stream, ready to go and bring you the latest, as Chris has been doing so eloquently, getting you guys all up to speed. So what's happening is I'm standing here facing the camera with the courthouse behind me, and I swear to you, every time I turn back to look and see, okay, what's going on? Am I going on air? Am I not? Every time I turn back around, there is more people. I'm going to guess 200 people, could be more, that are just surrounding the front of the courthouse there as these arguments about bail are going back and forth. You can feel the vibes here, right? And I think, going to your next question, Chris, about what does this mean for P. Diddy's legacy, overall, I think this is a win for him, especially the fact that at first this is a hung jury. When we're talking about racketeering, conspiracy, either side, we aren't able to decide. Maybe if it ends in a hung jury, there could be a retrial down the line. We don't know. It's still up in the air. But the fact that it's not guilty, their major win. The fact that it's not guilty on 2 more of the charges. The fact that he is only found guilty on the transportation to engage in prostitution. I think that's a major win for him. And especially in the way that celebrity lives are different than the ordinary people, quote unquote. And I'll call myself an ordinary person. My life is a little bit different than P. Diddy's. But I mean, as far as all of that goes, honestly, they talked about this during the ongoing trial. They talked about how there was another famous rapper who took part in these freak-offs, with the transportation to engage in prostitution, kind of going to that. Now, I'm not saying this person has been charged at all, but what I'm trying to say is that in the celebrity world, this is more acceptable. This is just something that happens. It's not something that people usually get charged for. So honestly, P. Diddy's reputation is not as down in the dumps, I think, as perhaps it maybe once was.
And you think of just how people consume media these days. You can listen to a Diddy song in your headphones on the subway on the way to work, and nobody knows what you're listening to. It's your business whether or not you want to still consume the content that he produces. Do have more updates coming in. The Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey continuing to say, I'm aware of cases. This is as far as whether Sean Combs, if bail should be set, because he's been found guilty on 2 counts related to the Mann Act, transportation to engage in prostitution. He says, I'm aware of cases involving minors, but we intend to raise relevant conduct at sentencing, the drugs and violence. The judge says, I like the letters from each side. When? A few hours. So we're expecting to hear something related to bail, moving and at least at some point today, potentially. The judge then says, I think that makes sense. Mr. Combs does not want to go back to the MDC, and Mr. Combs is shaking his head. So 1 p.m. letters, and we'll convene in the afternoon. I'll let the parties know when. Mark Agnifilo says he would be a fool, which he is not, to violate any condition. So the judge says for now, they are adjourned. So there you go, adjourned until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when I believe the prosecution and defense will be making some sort of argument about what happens now to Sean Diddy Combs ahead of any potential sentence related to the 2 charges that he was found guilty of, transportation to engage in prostitution. Have a poll, a big poll result, more than 24,000 of you voting on this. Predictions on the verdict. At the time, we had guilty on some counts at 48%. So you were correct. Guilty on all counts, 36%. Not guilty at 14%. William, I'm going to bring you back in because I asked Candace just what this defense team did well for Sean Diddy Combs, though he is still convicted on 2 pretty serious charges and could end up going to federal prison. But when you look at this defense team, this all-star cast, what did they do that's just a little bit different than the typical defense attorney that someone might get if they don't have the money that Sean Diddy Combs has?
Well, first of all, what you just said is probably the most important part of it here. I mean, they had next to limitless resources, which unfortunately is not true for the overwhelming majority of people who are charged either federally or on a state level. And so, Sean Combs is in a position to be able to afford not only top-notch attorneys, but everything that comes along with it. Top-notch investigators, people who are willing to pour through and able to pour through hours and hours and hours of videos, to go through thousands upon thousands of text messages. The system doesn't allow for that in most circumstances. So Combs is very lucky and blessed to be able to afford that type of attorney with the resources that go with it. As far as the lawyers themselves go, look, they did a fantastic job here. One of the things that they did during a closing argument was they humanized Sean Combs as much as they could. They did everything they could to take the sting out of that 2016 video that we've all seen 1,000 times now. They were successful in doing that. And in their cross-examination of the government's witnesses, they were able to sort of put on a shadow case. They called no witnesses, but instead they used the government's own witnesses against the government. And that's the key to cross-examination. When you have these witnesses who are testifying against your client, if you're able to spin it in such a way that they become your witnesses or testify favorably for your client, that's exactly what you want them to do, and that's what they did here. They certainly did that with Cassie Ventura. They did it with Jane. They did it with Mia, and those were obviously the three most important witnesses that the government had, and yet they were able to turn that testimony around and use it to their own advantage. It was brilliant.
Programming update for today as we are following this coverage live of the verdicts related to Sean Diddy Combs. We'll run through the verdicts once again for you here in just a moment, just in case you're just joining us, trying to figure out what's going on. I can tell you that count one, racketeering conspiracy, that was not guilty. Sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura, not guilty. Sex trafficking of the victim, pseudonym Jane, not guilty, but guilty counts on both related to guilty verdicts on both counts related to transportation to engage in prostitution. And we are breaking down exactly what this means. Court right now has been adjourned until this afternoon as the prosecution and defense are trying to figure out what is going to happen to Sean Combs ahead of any possible sentence that he could face. He's been staying at the Metro Detention Center since his arrest in September of last year. The defense is arguing $1 million bond, let Sean Combs go home. But then the prosecution saying, hey, he was still convicted. He needs to stay in custody ahead of whatever possible sentence, which there could be a sentence that puts Sean Combs in federal prison. So that part of the story is not done just yet, but we're expecting to learn a little more about what could happen ahead of sentencing this afternoon. Another update just coming in here. After the judge left the courtroom, from the gallery, there was a loud clapping and cheering as Sean Combs is led back into the holding cell. Candace, I think of yesterday when the partial verdict came back. We put up that sketch, and it was for the first time, at least that I saw in a sketch, that Sean Combs looked concerned. To think of less than 24 hours later, it is this situation that he's in. I keep asking for your reaction because it's just incredible to think when you look back on this case that was a strong one, that many people believed, a strong one by the prosecution. One question I have is why not call more witnesses? He's facing all these civil lawsuits for people saying that he did a lot of the things that Cassie Ventura and Jane accused him of. Why were there not more victims, that could have potentially bolstered the prosecution's case more?
Well, listen, we are going to find more about Gina. I think that is one of the instances where people have a lot of questions. For people who know her story, she had a lot to say. We didn't hear from her. We didn't hear from Christina Quorum. We didn't hear from security guards, as I've talked about. He's got a lot of civil lawsuits where some of this information might come out and play out. Why not do it? Just did not work strategically. Why didn't we hear from more prostitutes? I think that fact is that we know that when it comes to the Mann Act, that was the low-hanging fruit and that was proven. But when we look at other witnesses, we have to go on a case-by-case basis. What were their stories? What were the options in terms of, if I'm a prosecuting attorney, do I need to take a chance and have them on that stand? Or have I made my points? And I think that each side did their due diligence to bring the witnesses before the jury, make their case. As the defense did, they said, hey, I'm going to punch holes in these particular witnesses that you're bringing prosecution. And apparently it worked. But I think that one thing that people have to remember is this. When it comes to him getting out, this is a man that was convicted. This is a man that when he came to New York, as William said, he's someone who brought drugs and was set up for a freak off and was going to continue in that same vein. If I were the defense, though, I would say, but that was also a man who was addicted to drugs. This is someone now who is not addicted to drugs. He is also someone now who knows that his fate is a lot more important than he would have ever thought of. And I would make that argument on that side. But I think I'm for the prosecution to say, why would he go anywhere? He's convicted on 2 counts. This is not something that leads to, yes, let's let him walk out today, a free man. I don't think that would make sense. Terrible precedent.
Another programming update for those of you joining us here on the Law and Crime YouTube stream. Jesse Weber, who has been one of the leading voices in analyzing this case, going back to when Sean Combs was indicted, as all of you know here on Law and Crime. He's going to come on the stream, take over for me at 11:30 this morning Eastern time. So if you have post-verdict questions, be sure to drop them in the chat. We'll get those for Jesse as well as Elizabeth. Very excited to hear just her thoughts, what it was like to be in the courtroom as that verdict was read. And then if there is any sort of news conference, if the attorneys come out, both prosecution and defense, we will bring you those news conferences live. Also, Dan Abrams is going to be joining us at 10:50 to talk a little bit more about this verdict and his reaction, having covered so many high-profile cases throughout his career. William, I have a question coming in here. This is from IA. It's a question. Candace, I'll ask you this question as well. William, I'll start with you. Does this mean that the prosecution didn't pick its witnesses well? It seems they didn't take testimonies and sentenced him based on receipts for prostitution, no?
So again, whenever there's a verdict, regardless of what the verdict is, hindsight's always 20/20. So we can easily sit here and pick apart what the prosecution did. We can sit here and pick apart what the defense team did. But as Candace said earlier, they both did an outstanding job. Whether or not they should have called other witnesses, some of these other women who are suing Diddy, the fact of the matter is this, is that every one of those witnesses who the prosecution could have called because there were lawsuits going on, the defense team is going to say, this is yet another person who's suing Holmes. This is yet another person, financial motive here, because that's where those witnesses would come from. So I think it's easy to sit here and say, yes, they should have called these other witnesses. But again, all those witnesses probably have their own baggage that came along with it. The key is quorum. I am surprised that we didn't hear from Kay. I don't know what her situation was in terms of immunity. I don't know if it would have tipped the scales, but if there was one witness who, as I sit here, obviously not being part of the trial, that I probably would have wanted to hear from, it was her. I think she could have helped the government, again, if she was willing to testify on their behalf.
And you're taking a live look outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. You can just see the crowd of people who have gathered in the wake of these verdicts that have come down in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. A live shot there of the front door. His defense wants him to go home today. $1 million bond. We'll see if the judge, what he has to say about that. The prosecution has asked that Sean Combs continue to be held ahead of any sort of sentencing. We don't know when a sentencing date would be, but there's going to be conversation about what happens to Sean Combs after this verdict in the afternoon. Court's been adjourned until 1 o'clock. We're waiting to get our Elizabeth Milner. She's just getting set up right now. So if you do have questions for Elizabeth about what just went down in the courtroom, put those in the chat and we'll ask those questions to her live on the air. Candace, not to simplify what happened, but as we try to analyze all the testimony over 7 weeks and whether this witness was strong or that witness was strong, in cases like this, what does it just come down to? How often does it just come down to these were 12 people that just saw it this way, and if it was 12 other people, they could have seen it another way?
I think that is the most concise, specific, right answer. You don't know these 12 people and how they believed and felt about each of these particular witnesses and crimes. If we go back to the first witness, which was Daniel Phillip, a prostitute, and then
We are looking outside at the courthouse for Diddy. Drop it down in the chat. What do you guys think sentencing will look like? Do you guys think Diddy will receive bail? He is proposing $1 million bail. Okay, what say the sippers on the Diddy verdict that has came down this morning? Acquitted on 3 charges of the most serious ones and convicted of the lesser of the 2 of transpo of a hoe. Okay, transpo of a hoe. Diddy got transpo of a hoe, convicted twice on those 2 charges. Let's listen in.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber and welcome to our continued coverage of the Sean Combs criminal case. What a day. The verdict is in. Sean Combs has been acquitted of all charges except two: transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations. This is a massive, massive win for Sean Combs. There's no other way to say it. When he was facing racketeering conspiracy to life in prison, and now, oh, by the way, sex trafficking, a minimum of 15 years in prison, acquitted of those charges, both with respect to Cassie Ventura Fine and Jane, and now has been convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Yes, they are federal crimes. Yes, the prosecution may be even advocating for 20 years in prison. Each one has a maximum of 10 years in prison. They want it to run one after the other. That could be highly unlikely. There is no, our understanding, mandatory minimum for transportation to engage in prostitution. In other words, he is looking at a totally different reality than he was at the beginning of the day. And now we are trying to understand what happens next. There is a consideration today about whether he will be released. Will he be released pending sentencing, which might happen about 70 or 90 days from now? And that will come out today. We're going to get a little bit of logistics about what's happening. And we're also going to try to figure out what the possible sentence could mean and what this verdict means. You have to imagine this is a loss for the prosecution. This is a loss for the Southern District of New York, who compiled a case about him. The accusation was operating a criminal enterprise for years. The jury did not believe it. We have a statement right now that came in from the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, and Special Agent in charge of the New York Field Office of Homeland Security Investigations, Ricky J. Patel, on the verdict. This just came in, quote, "Sex crimes deeply scar victims, and the disturbing reality is that sex crimes are all too present in many aspects of our society. Victims endure gut-wrenching physical and mental abuse, leading to lasting trauma. New Yorkers and all Americans want this scourge stopped and perpetrators brought to justice. Prosecuting sex crimes requires brave victims to come forward and tell their harrowing stories. We and our law enforcement partners recognize the hardships victims endure and have prioritized a victim-centered approach to investigating and prosecuting these cases. Today, we recognize the important work of the SDNY's Civil Rights Unit, as well as the tireless efforts of the women and men at HSI who are devoted to combating human trafficking. We thank the special agents from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York, Digital Forensic Unit, and the Complex Analytics and Social Media Enhancement Team at the New York, New Jersey High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. We would also like to thank our partners at the NYPD for their assistance in this matter and for sharing our victim-centered approach to combating sex crimes. Nothing necessarily on point about the verdict per se. Interesting. Let me bring in, by the way, so we're going to take your questions as they come in. We're going to try to do extended coverage as we figure out what the rest of the day will look like in terms of when sentencing might be scheduled, in terms of whether or not Sean Combs will be released today. Will we see him? That's a question in court for all of the action for this trial. And SiriusXM host Mina Saywat-Lone, it's great to have you both here. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. Your reaction to this verdict, and number two, what can we expect for the rest of the day? And you know what? Let me add a number three in there. What was it like inside that courtroom when the verdict came down?
Well, a lot of people were at the edge of their seats when that verdict was about to be read out loud. I was very anxious,
I don't know
even
if we're
sitting
having
in
an
my
audio
seat in the
issue, if we can hear Elizabeth, but I can't hear her on my end. There we go. Now we got Elizabeth. Hey, Elizabeth, you're back with us.
Oh, okay. I was like, is my mic on? My mic is on, I promise. So I will say this, Jesse, that there was a lot of anticipation while that verdict was about to be read out loud. I think a lot of us who were on the press side of the courtroom were at the edge of our seats waiting to see the jury's reaction whenever they came into the courtroom, but also what their verdicts would be rendered. And obviously we know that to be that he was only found guilty on count 3 and 5, that being transportation to engage in prostitution and religious to Jane, but not guilty on count 1, RICO conspiracy, and not guilty on count 2 and 4, that being sex trafficking, Cassie and Jane. So I think from the family's perspective, from the defense's perspective, and even some people inside that courtroom, I think they were pretty pleased by the outcome of the jury's decision. I did note that there was an audible applause. A lot of people were kind of either doing prayer hands, up to the sky, that type of thing. And that was coming from the family's kind of point of view. And it seemed like they were pleased. And I don't know if you heard, Jesse, when I was talking with Chris earlier, he being Sean Combs, turned around in his defense chair and told his family that he's coming home. So it seems like from his perspective that maybe his defense attorneys told him it's a possibility the judge may let you go today. I didn't think that was at all a possibility, given that he has been found guilty on 2 of the charges. But it seems like from the defense's perspective, they were so pleased with the verdict. Obviously, they would have loved for an acquittal on all counts, but in terms of the guilty counts that were rendered, I think that they were just pretty happy. And according to Mark Agnifilo, now Sean Combs has his life back. In terms of just other people who were inside that courtroom, it seems like, again, people not even from the Combs family, but other people on the public side were applauding the defense team after the verdict was rendered. There were a lot of hugs inside that courtroom. It was either the family, it was the defense attorneys. I saw, even when the verdict was read out loud, Tenny Garagos and Sean Combs really having kind of a tight squeeze on their hands. There was tears flowing from Brian Steele, from Tenny Garagos, from Ana Maria Esteval, from Mark Agnifilo. And so it seems like the defense and they did a good job. They didn't put up any witnesses, but they did an excellent job with the cross-examinations, and they were pretty pleased given the jury's decision.
We're getting a lot of questions in about this, Elizabeth. Before we get to them, just real quick, what can we expect for the rest of the day? I understand we might have a development at 1 p.m., or at least we believe those are when papers are going to be submitted in terms of bail, right? In terms of whether or not Sean Combs can be released today. Which, by the way, we are in a very different scenario. When he applied for bail during the course of this trial, during the course of this criminal case, the sex trafficking and the racketeering allegations were hanging over him. So when you talked about, was he a danger to the community? What was he charged with? The seriousness of the offenses, likelihood of fleeing, those considerations were coupled with the charges that he was facing. He no longer faces those charges. These transportation charges, sure, they're federal crimes, but he is in a much better position to argue for release today than he has ever been. What do we expect the schedule is going to be for the rest of the day?
Well, I knew I missed one of your questions, Jesse. So sorry about that.
Nah,
but
no
yeah,
worries.
It seems like so it seems like both parties are working right now to kind of draft up an email or a letter to the judge as far as their arguments as to why Sean Combs should or should not be released on some type of bail condition pending his sentencing. Now, Mark Agnifilo, he stood up and he says that Sean Combs should be released. He should be able to walk out of that courthouse today. Now, right now, he's not at MDC Brooklyn. From my understanding, he's still being held at kind of a holding cell up inside the courthouse. But Mark Agnifilo was pretty adamant. He wants his client to be released on some type of bail condition. He should be able to return to Two-Star Island over in Florida. He should have travel limits only to Florida, Los Angeles, where he has another home, and to New York City. If there was any type of questions in regards to him being a very wealthy person and him having access to a private plane, according to Mark Agnifilo, his plane is currently over in Maui. He doesn't even have access to his plane. In terms of just even Sean Combs' passport, Mark Agnifilo said both he and Tenny Garagos have possession of his passport and that they would return it to pretrial services, even proposing that he be released on a $1 million bail, given that he was acquitted on RICO conspiracy and given that he was also acquitted on 2 counts of sex trafficking. And so they said that even the family who was inside that courtroom for the verdict, that they would be able to kind of sign some type of condition to help him be allowed to leave on bail conditions if the judge goes for it. Now, obviously, from the government side, they were saying that the defense is being a little too lenient, given that Sean Combs was still found guilty on 2 charges, but we'll see what those arguments look like when they return later this afternoon.
We're also talking about the reaction to this verdict. I mentioned the statement from the government. Per CNN, Cassie Ventura's lawyer, Douglas Wigdor, told CNN, following, again, the Sean Combs being acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering, found guilty of the Mann Act transportation to engage in prostitution charges. There was a lot of mixed emotions in that courtroom. Obviously, we would have liked to have seen convictions on the RICO charges and the sex trafficking charges, but Cassie prompted this investigation by the Southern District, and now Sean Combs stands before this court as a convicted felon of 2 crimes. To be very clear, he was acquitted with respect to the sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He was found guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution Constitution with respect to Cassie. So Cassie and her testimony did support one of the convictions in this case. Let me bring in Mina Sewat-Lona. Mina, so good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a number of Super Chat questions that are coming in. For example, we have a Super Chat question from JB Dub. Thank you so much. Jesse, man, just want to say thank you for everything, man. Great job covering this. That's so kind. Thank you so much. This is an interesting one we had here from Super Chat. This is from JAM. Thank you so much. How does this verdict impact the civil sexual assault lawsuits that he faces? Mina, you and I both know different standard of law, right? Different burden of proof. But I do wonder if we see some sort of movement or action as a result of this verdict.
I mean, there's no way to foresee that, but I would say I don't think it's going to change. I think that he's going to still have to fight those allegations, and they're like.
Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired. Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay dipping.